Hey guys, welcome back to the Day in the Life podcast, Career Insights brought to you by ConsultSpot. This is the first podcast that's been recorded after publishing it. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's listened so far, everyone who's followed on social media. If you aren't following it, it's ConsultSpot or ConsultSpot app on all platforms. Uh, do it right now. But seriously, it means a lot. Especially when you're starting from scratch. Every like, follow, share goes a long way. uh, and most importantly, the feedback's been super helpful. Most of it's positive. Some of you had some feedback on questions to ask. I know some of you wanted to dive deeper on how people got the role, etc. These are all very helpful, so keep sending them my way and I'll try my best to incorporate that in the podcast going forward. But yeah, so for this episode, jumping in, as with the last three episodes, it's another friend of mine from college. I guess I'm going to blow through all my college friends first before getting to anyone else. Uh, we're featuring my friend John Maloney. So, John and I lived on the same floor in freshman year. We've been friends for a long time. We both started off as computer engineers. I unfortunately realized I was not cut out for it, and saner heads prevailed. I disappointed my family and dropped out of engineering in my second year and switched to a much more manageable resource economics major. But John stuck it out, went on to pursue his master's in AI at Stanford, and now works at Amazon Robotics. So I think this will be very helpful for anyone interested in a career in tech or robotics specifically. So uh, and yeah, before we jump right in, if you want to speak to John or any other guests featured on the podcast, as usual, just send an email to hello@consultspot.com and we'll set you up. Um, so from there, let's just jump in. Hey, John, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey there, Adish. Happy to be here.
Cool. John, just to kick us off, could you give us a very high level overview of your role and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a software development engineer at Amazon Robotics. I design software to help the flow through the warehouses.
Got it. And before we dive into your role, just for some background, could you give us a sense of kind of where you went to school? I know you pursued your master's as well, just kind of how that ties into what you do right now.
Yeah, of course. So I went to UMass Amherst, studied computer engineering. Had done a few internships, some I liked, some I didn't, and decided, hey, I'm going to go for my master's. So I went over to Stanford and got my master's in computer science with a concentration in AI. And then one of my internships was at Amazon, so I got a return offer, and there I am.
Okay, that's super interesting. What made you pick AI as your focus coming out of undergrad? Because I know there's a few different ways you can go about it.
Yeah, so going into undergrad in the first place, I was always interested in robotics, and unfortunately, the program I was in didn't have a ton of robotics. And the way to kind of shift my focus was to take computer science classes at UMass Amherst. And a couple of those classes I took were artificial intelligence and machine learning, and they just really resonated with me. So then when I went over to Stanford, which is one of the hubs of this kind of learning in the world, it was a no-brainer for me to sort of follow that path.
And in terms of your journey getting to Stanford, I'm curious what your experience was kind of applying to Stanford. What other schools did you apply to? What do you think was on your resume or your application that really helped you, stand out? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but we both went to UMass. UMass is not a tier one school, so breaking into some of the top programs could be harder off of just like the college brand name. So I'm assuming it was a lot of things on your resume that kind of helped position you to like break into that program.
Yeah, that's a great question. Going into undergrad, I didn't even apply to Stanford. I'm like, oh, it's a whole different application process. Like, it just wasn't for me at the time. After my time at UMass Amherst, I applied to, I think, 6 schools for grad school, 3 sort of tier one schools, as you say, being Berkeley, Carnegie Mellon, and Stanford, and then 3 not tier one schools. And I had every intention of going to a quote not tier one school. Um, then when I got the acceptance into Stanford, obviously that changed everything. I think personally, it is a lot about luck. You have to
Yep.
apply to more than one school because to get, full denial from Berkeley and then full acceptance from Stanford within a week, like it clearly matters who's reading your resume and how
Yep.
they're feeling that day. I think my strongest asset, like, yeah, GPA was good, everything like that. My strongest asset was probably the letters written by the professors that I asked. So it's
Interesting.
important to sort of build those connections. One, because it's always going to do that. Two, you don't know who they're going to be connected to on the other side or how eloquently they can kind of say you'll be a good fit in that program.
Got it. And just in terms of logistically applying for a master's in computer science, was there a specific like exam you had to take, or was it just like, because I know there's like GMAT and whatnot for like some of the other programs, but was there anything for you?
Just the GRE, so the general, sort of the follow on to the SAT. Nothing computer science specific. They always want to see projects and they want to see things like that. I didn't have a GitHub portfolio or anything like that. It
Hmm.
was just strong projects in my courses and then a strong score in the GRE.
Okay. And at a high level, could you touch on like what kind of internships did you do? Like, what they were focused on?
Yeah, yeah. So my first two internships were more at commercial companies.
Hmm.
So you're doing product support, not with the direct customer, but maybe with internal customers, or sort of building out a small tool to be used around the company. And then my next two was at a research division owned by Raytheon. And so that was much more sort of slower paced, more into the science behind what you're doing, a lot of like networking protocol, things of that nature. Then I interned at Amazon, and what I think is awesome and will come up more in a future discussion is that internship was completely different than my full time job now.
Interesting.
So that was with a global shipping team, and it was all back end development, so kind of databases, things of that, and that one was a much stronger fit for my skills.
And coming out of your master's program, did you kind of go through the job search and like apply to a bunch of companies, or did you interview with a bunch of places, or was Amazon kind of your top choice when they reached back out for a return offer?
Right. So I went through a job search, but it was more at the time of finding that first internship when
Hmm.
I was searching. So I applied to over a dozen companies, and one tip I'll give to anyone interested is you are going to fail tech interviews. Like they are a terrible system to sort of find if you'll be a good fit, and you'll just have a bad day. You'll get a question you don't understand, and you'll fail it, and maybe you'll have to wait a year to reapply for that company, and that's unfortunate, but there are hundreds of companies. So just keep applying and learn from those failures. So, I failed at Facebook's, I failed at Google's, I thought I failed at Amazon's. They gave me an internship and it was a great experience. So when they gave a return offer, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna keep it. I'll be back home in
Yep.
Boston with my friends and family, with Oddish, and so I didn't do a search following it. The only question was I had two offers: a return offer from Amazon, and then there was one startup in Silicon Valley. And I chose to go with the safer route and stick with Amazon.
And how'd you kind of land in robotics specifically? I know you briefly alluded how you kind of focus on AI, but what like was it Amazon specifically offering the robotics position that attracted to you, or was your educational background like somewhat focused in robotics specifically as well?
Yeah, so my educational background, specifically the master's, was heavily focused in robotics, sort of that concentration in AI. There's a few required courses and then some optional, and all the optional ones I took were robotic focused.
Interesting.
My internship was not robotics focused, and my manager at the time had mentioned, hey, um, if you want to come back to Amazon, but maybe not on this team in a more robotics focused team, that's possible. Turns out it wasn't, so I accepted the return offer. And then organization restructured and that team reduced in scope, and suddenly I was on the Amazon robotics team. So it kind of worked out to shoehorn my way in there, but I
Hmm.
did study for that.
And you're just to clarify, the internship you did at Amazon was between like your master's, like year one and year two, or was that during undergrad?
Mhm.
Okay.
No, it was exactly. It was between first and second year of masters.
Okay. And so now you work at Amazon Robotics. Is that like a separate group within Amazon that kind of serves the other BUs, or is there like a robotics group that sits within the various BUs of uh, Amazon? Could you explain the structure and then could
Yeah,
you kind
yeah.
of
So it's not the most clear structure, so feel free to ask more questions. But Amazon Robotics stems from Kiva Robotics, which I think acquired back in maybe 2016
Mhm.
as a different company. Um, so Amazon Robotics, it has its own product, the Kiva robot, that it sort of looks like a giant Roomba and drives these shelves around the warehouses.
Mhm.
Within that, there's this organization called Advanced Technology that I'm part of. And we're technically part of Amazon proper, but we reside and work with Amazon Robotics. So it's not exactly clear where the line is, but we do all fall under the Amazon umbrella.
Okay. And what is your groups and your specifically like, focus, and what does a typical day in your life look like right now?
Yeah, so with this Advanced Technology org, is a bit of a split. Some teams work on building new what we call work cells, which are robots to sort of improve the throughput in a building or automate functions, whether it's building up these cases of boxes or breaking them down. And then my team and a few other teams are more software focused. So we're sort of looking at the warehouse in a big picture and trying to see where that bottleneck is and see if we can recommend solutions to get through that bottleneck. So if we say, hey, this conveyor is always blocked, we kind of figure out why and sort of put that into our website so that a user at that warehouse, because those are our customers,
Hmm.
can see, hey, lane 3 is blocked because the trailer is full and hasn't been pulled. Let's pull the trailer and then we'll increase throughput.
Got it. So would you say primary focus is kind of helping optimize the Amazon like delivery system, everything from warehouses, just packaging, etc. Just trying to find any efficiencies that can help optimize the big Amazon machine, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Reducing the time a specific item spends in the warehouse.
Okay, are there outside of your team specifically within Amazon Robotics, are there software
Mhm.
engineers focused on like different projects, or is it mostly centered around like optimization of warehouses? Just I'm sure like some of the other listeners would be curious.
Yeah, so I think most teams are focused on optimization of warehouses, but there are a few teams looking at other types of buildings, whether it's related to Amazon Fresh with the grocery products and what sort of automation we can put in that space, or other kinds of buildings besides the typical fulfillment center.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm curious, based on what you know about like robotics as a growing space, what other companies do you think are doing like interesting work around robot? I know that's a very generalized question, but I'm curious if you've had, your friends from your master's program kind of go into different companies and what their experience has been. Just some general advice for someone looking to break into this field.
Yeah, so robotics is interesting because, you have the mechanical aspect, the hardware aspect, and this sort of software, whether it's AI or not aspect. Um, I think, as with most, you'll split into the commercial versus the sort of government or, research oriented companies. So for people at Raytheon, for example, they're doing great robotic research, but it's at a different pace because it's, contract based or government backed. Whereas companies, whether it's Amazon, Google, Tesla, any of the many Silicon Valley companies, can sort of go at their own pace and try out initiatives faster. Um, but the core work, whether it's software or hardware, is going to be similar across these companies.
Got it. And in terms of skills, what does someone need in order to be successful? Like we can dive into the hard skills like languages or
Mhm.
any other hardware skills, but I'm curious, what do you use on a day-to-day basis, and what does someone generally in this industry need to know in order to be successful?
Yeah, I'll start with, my experience at Amazon first. And although I'm in the robotics org, my role is more as a software developer. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be more similar to software roles at other companies,
Yep.
let alone, say, a robotic specific role. Um, in terms of at Amazon, you need to be proficient in one language to sort of, get past that interview hurdle. But you can use and you will use many different languages on the job. Amazon is most heavily invested in Java, but
Mm-hmm.
if you want to do a quick script in Python, or if you have a good reason as to why Rust or some other more modern language is a better fit, then your project may be able to adapt and include that. And if you're going to do front end work, I think just like everyone, we use a lot of JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to sort of know how to read it, but you can learn a lot of the details on the job. You just need to sort of get past that interview hurdle.
I guess touching on the interview, like what was that experience like for you? I know there's probably some stuff that you can't like cover in detail because they use the same process, but whatever you're about able to share, would love to hear what the interview process was like and what someone who's applying can expect, and in general how to do well.
Yeah, so I actually am an interviewer now, so sort of I can see it from the other perspective.
Mm-hmm.
As Jake on the previous episode had mentioned, Amazon is very into their leadership principles, which are sort of these, a dozen or so guidelines that they sort of try to work by.
Mm-hmm.
And in that interview, depending on the role, whether it's an internship or an entry level or higher level up engineer, um, you'll either have one, two, or three interviewers, and they'll be targeting different leadership principles. So they'll ask you some behavioral questions to try to see how you adapt to maybe changing deadlines or ambiguity, and then they'll ask a coding question where there'll be a shared screen. We'll see you code. It doesn't have to compile. You don't have to have. If you're missing a parenthesis, that's okay. We want to see how you think, and if we sort of add an enhancement, how do you adapt your code and adapt your thought process?
Interesting. And you said you can work off of knowing just one language. Do you mind elaborating on that? Do
Yeah,
they
yeah.
not explicitly say like, "Hey, this is the tech stack you need to work with"? Is it more like, "Hey, whatever you're comfortable with, you can come in and work with that, and then we'll kind of teach you the ropes later"?
Yeah, so the further I've gotten in industry, the more I've realized it's not important to know every language or to be the best programmer in the world. There's sort
Yep.
of more to the job. So if you have that one good language to get through that interview, because you can pick any language you want for that coding interview, um, and you show proficient, just general understanding of how languages work, your if
Mm-hmm.
loops, your sort of things like that, um, then when you get to the job, if your team is using Java, they'll teach you what you need to know. You can read their code. You'll set up, sort of like pick up on it. You don't have to know it all going into it.
Got it. In terms of your day to day, what would you say is the best and the toughest part of your job? I know things might have changed since you've gotten like more comfortable with the role, but if you
Mm-hmm.
had to share one in each category.
Yeah, so I think the best is the people that I work with, learning from them. So if I submit a code review and they leave a dozen comments saying what's wrong with it, they do
Mm-hmm.
so in a way to improve my coding ability. And that goes back to, you don't have to know everything on that first run. Within those first few months, you'll see the comments on your code reviews start to go down and down because your
Mm-hmm.
code is getting better without you even putting significant effort in. Sort of the hardest part can be as you get more familiar with the product and you start to take on a higher role.
Mm-hmm.
The number of meetings you're involved in increases,
Oh,
and
yep.
that's okay as your role starts to shift, but it can still be a little intimidating just when suddenly your Wednesdays used to be free and now you have 3 or 4 weekly meetings on there. So sort of adapting to that part of the engineering is a little bit harder.
And I think that's consistent with most software development roles, right? The more senior you get, you kind of get removed from the day to day, like
Mm-hmm.
actual writing code, and you're now more so managing a team of people, and you're stuck. And based on that, like some people either decide to stay at like an individual contributor level and just focus on the code, and for some others, they prefer the management round, especially some people who are like not as technical uh, within that space.
Right. So
Um,
you'll write less code, but you'll write more important code. You'll work on those more ambiguous, harder to define problems, and then a lower level engineer will sort of carry it across the finish line.
got it. So switching into compensation, how much do you think someone in your role can typically expect to make at Amazon or comparable companies that have robotics roles? And I'm curious what the breakdown of that compensation looks like as well.
Yeah. So sticking to like the software side, because I can't speak for the hardware compensation. Um, as mentioned previously on this, it varies greatly depending on which company and where in the country or the world you are working.
Hmm.
Because seeing the Silicon Valley salaries versus Boston or Austin,
Hmm.
Texas, like the cost of living does play a role in what you're paid.
Yep.
Um, but I think coming out of college or switching into an entry level position in this field, you can expect to make 100, 120, 130 as your sort of base pay, and
Hmm.
then with Amazon you'll get a signing bonus, you'll get stocks, so that can sort of bring your total in the 160 to 180 range,
Hmm.
and then you sort of work up from there. And I think this is comparable to other companies, although some Silicon Valley, Facebook, Twitter type companies may give, higher signing bonus, higher salary, a lower stock option, things like that.
Yeah, so it's typically those three buckets, right? The base salary and the signing bonus. It's usually you know paid out over 1, 2, 3 years. They just pay it out in chunks, and then the last one is the stock options that usually vest over 4 year schedule. So I think they kind of collectively view that to view your annual compensation. Is that accurate?
Right. Yeah, I think that's accurate. And 2 years for the signing and 4 years for the stocks. And as you sort of get promoted, at least within Amazon, your base salary will go up, a
Mm-hmm.
little, not a ton, but your stock options go up a lot more to sort of keep you invested in that company's success.
Yep. And it's interesting. This is a completely side note. I feel like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
these large tech companies they have more flexibility when it comes to when you're especially when you're negotiating for the role. Whatever it is, they'll be flexible when it comes to the sign-on bonus and maybe stock, but not as much base salary. I wonder if it's more of like a on the back end, that gets written off differently for accounting purposes without raising the payroll too much. So just for people to keep in mind, if you're in one of these interviews and you're negotiating for salary, it might be worth it to kind of go after a better sign-on bonus or more stocks because I think that's where they typically tend to have more flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the last question is, what advice would you give someone who's trying to be in your position? This might be someone in college trying to prep for a
Mm-hmm.
career in robotics, or someone further down the road, someone looking to make a switch. Like, what piece of advice would you give someone?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one I had already given, and that is you are going to fail when you
Mm-hmm.
interview. And it can get disheartening. You can kind of get down on yourself because you're like, why did I go to school for it if I can't, pass this one coding question? And
Yep.
that's the wrong way to look at it. Expect failure and then just keep trying. So, sort of, apply to every opportunity you see. If there's a practice interview with a coding question, take it just to kind of get that real life experience for what the interview will be like. And then eventually you're going to pass. And, at that point, you're in. Um, just focus on your job. And then if you're ready to make a move, then you can start to brush up on those interview skills again.
Got it. That's super helpful. Are there any resources you'd recommend people look into where they can kind of get some insights or practice questions or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean the most common sort of coding question hub is LeetCode, and they have great practices there. I also did the Cracking the Coding Interview book, which is pretty popular. It's this big green book, and you just kind of read through. They talk about, hey, this process is not ideal, but you have to deal with it. So these are the principles you should know going into it.
Cool. That's super helpful. Thanks so much for taking the time today, John. This has been super helpful.
Awesome, yeah, my pleasure. Wishing the best to both you and your listeners.
Thanks. See you. And that's a wrap. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you found that helpful. As usual, if you'd like to speak to John or any of the other guests featured on the podcast or anyone else in a career or industry that you're interested in, feel free to shoot us a note at hello@consultspot.com and we'll match you with someone for a one-on-one call. Um, Other than that, hope you liked the episode. If you did, leave a review on one of the platforms that you're listening to on, or follow us on social media if you're more into short form clips. Uh, that's pretty much it. I'll catch you on the next one. See you.